Hi, this is the business guy. So how do you protect your assets if you have a medium net worth? So you say, hey, business guy, I'm not a multimillionaire. I don't need one of those offshore trusts that you talk about all the time. I don't need it yet anyway. I just have an average net worth. What do I do to protect my assets? Because my assets are just important to me as that multimillionaire's assets are important to him or her. So what do I do? Or you may say, what do I do if I just want to set up an asset protection plan in the US? I don't like all that offshore stuff. What do I do? This video is for you. So let's go ahead and take a look at some illustrations and I'll show you exactly what we need to do. If you haven't clicked subscribe already, go ahead and do that now so you can be notified of the next video. So let's go ahead and take a look. So super quick, this is how we would normally do it. Offshore trust, offshore LLC. You say, I don't want to do it that way, so what do you do? Well, it's very similar actually. What we do for domestic asset protection, instead of the offshore trust, we set up a US trust. So that trust will be in, say, South Dakota, for example. South Dakota is the strongest asset protection trust in the US. And it is not nearly as strong as the offshore trust because it is still under the jurisdiction of the U.S. courts. So it beats the Delaware Trust, Nevada Trust, Alaska Trust, Wyoming Trust. South Dakota's trust is the strongest trust in the United States. And what we do is similar. We put, for example, a Wyoming LLC inside of the South Dakota trust, and then you can be the signature on the bank account, the manager of the Wyoming LLC. The Wyoming LLC opens the bank account, and again, the Wyoming LLC is 100%. The owner is the South Dakota Trust, the trustee in South Dakota. So when the courts say give me the money, they can jump in as the manager of your Wyoming LLC, signature on your bank account, and protect those assets. Now, if you get a very aggressive court, you get a very aggressive plaintiff or creditor, then there is a possibility they could seize the assets. And we may need to transfer trust from South Dakota to offshore if needed. We're just talking about doing things in the US in a simplified version of that. Okay, you say, that's great, but I don't have enough money to justify setting up a South Dakota trust. So what do I do? So for liquid assets, for the next step down, so we have the top rung on the ladder, setting up an offshore trust, have an offshore LLC, have a bank account offshore. Next step down is setting up a Bahamas trust, which is less money, less protective, and that owns your offshore trust. Next step down is a South Dakota trust, and that owns a US LLC that holds a bank account. And the next step down from there, first rung on the ladder protection. What we do is we set up Wyoming LLC, we'll open a bank account, and it will hold your bank account in the Wyoming LLC's name. Now on the Wyoming LLC, so you have privacy of ownership, and we'll add two services to the Wyoming LLC. We'll have a nominee manager that shows up in the public records, and then we'll have a virtual office in Wyoming. So you'll have a Wyoming address. Somebody looks in the public record in subsequent years, you can actually see who the manager is in the public records. It does show up, in spite of things I've heard online to the contrary. I know because I've been setting up Wyoming LLCs for the last 33 years. You need to have a nominee service if you don't want to have your name showing up in the public record year after year. The virtual office service provides a phone number. It's answered during business hours. Corporate office is how may I help you. And it also has an address, a street address, so that you can receive mail. And that's the address that you can put in the public records if you need to do that. And the key thing is this LLC holds your bank account privately. It also can offer some protection because Wyoming LLCs have single member LLC charging order protection. Now, if you're in a lawsuit in another state, if you don't live in Wyoming, Wyoming is the least populous state, you need to have a multi-member LLC in most states. So what we'll do is we might set up, if you need a multi-member LLC for asset protection in your state, which is most states, I think that 44 or 45 states need to have 2 or more members for your LLC in order to have asset protection. So what we'll do is we'll set up a second LLC that may own, say, let's say 2% of this one. So you'll own the other 98%. And for the other LLC, you can do it vice versa. This Wyoming LLC will own 2% of your LLC number 2. So that way you can have a multi-member LLC with just having one human being. So just you. You can have a multi-member LLC if you're the only person that owns both LLCs. So that's an option. Another option is we set up a trust to be one of the members of the LLC. So those are a couple options there. So you can turn a single member LLC into a multi-member LLC, but only have one human being involved. So that way you get better asset protection when somebody sues you personally. So that's how we protect liquid assets. If you want just a US-based asset protection structure or a lower cost asset protection structure. So in order of most protective to least protective, it's the Cook Islands Trust, owning a Cook Islands LLC that has an offshore bank account. Next step down, that Bahamian trust can convert into a Cook Islands Trust, a stronger trust if needed. Next step down in cost and asset protection is having a South Dakota trust. Now, U.S. courts do have jurisdiction over South Dakota trustees or U.S. trustees at all, for that matter. So those assets may be vulnerable to a U.S. court, unlike the offshore trust. But it is a level of asset protection that is less costly, as well as being U.S. based for those people who just can't get past the mental thought of having their assets outside of the United States. And finally, the first rung on the ladder for asset protection for liquid assets is the Wyoming LLC with a virtual office and nominee privacy service. You open a bank account in the name of that LLC. It is more protective than just holding the assets in your own name. Now, it gives you privacy because you can get a separate EIN for your LLC. So the LLC bank account is under the company's EIN instead of your social security number, so it increases your privacy and gives you that first level of privacy and protection if you don't have a lot of money to protect. Okay, now let's look at real estate asset protection and what do you do there if you want to have a lower cost asset protection structure. What we do for your personal residence is we put your personal residence into a land trust for privacy of ownership. The trustee of your land trust is a Wyoming LLC that we set up for you that will also have the nominee privacy service and the virtual office service, so that when somebody looks in the public records, they won't see your name associated with that LLC that is the trustee of the land trust that owns your home. So when you put your home into a land trust, your ownership remains private. Also, you get to keep your home ownership tax benefits, such as being able to write off the interest and avoid capital gains when you sell your property on a certain portion of your sales proceeds. Now, for estate planning, we may have a living trust be the beneficiary of the land trust so that things pass on to your heirs when you pass, or it can become the beneficiary of the land trust upon your passing. And then finally, for equity stripping, to strip out the equity out of your home, we set up another Wyoming LLC, not the same one, a different one. So what we do at this second LLC is we will record an equity stripping line of credit mortgage against your personal residence to pull out the equity. When somebody looks in the public records, it looks like your home is mortgaged to the hilt. And this is just an equity line of credit associated with the mortgage or deed of trust to record an encumbrance against your property. So when people look to see if you have much equity, you have nothing to take. So what that does is it decreases the chance that a contingency fee attorney will take the case against you, because they say, gosh, yes, they have a home, but they have no equity in the home. I don't think I'll take this case because there's no meat on that bone. And because it is an equity line of credit promissory note payable to an LLC that you own privately, there's no money changing hands. It's just like an equity line of credit that you might get with Bank of America or Citibank, and there's no money that you've actually pulled out of it yet. So in the public records, it shows mortgage to the hilt, but in reality, it's payable to a company that you own privately. Now, if we need to get advanced and we need to get a third-party lender involved that purchases that mortgage, we can put the proceeds from that third-party mortgage into an international trust if you need super robust asset protection, and if that's something that you need to do down the line, you can do that. So next we get to rental properties, but as a review, personal residence and a land trust for privacy with an equity stripping mortgage against it payable to another LLC that you own privately. The trustee of this land trust, and that will be a different Wyoming LLC than is the mortgage holder on the equity stripping strategy that we'll employ for you. Okay, so now let's get to rental property. What do you do if you have some rental property, and how do you protect that? Well, it's one extra tool. It's the same thing we just did for your home with one extra tool, and that is an LLC. Okay, so how do we protect your rental property? So here's an investment property right here. So we do a similar strategy, but we have an extra twist here. The rental property will go into a land trust, so you have privacy of ownership. Additional benefits with a land trust is when you put your home or rental property into a land trust, as long as it is between 1 and 4 dwelling units, that is a place you can live in, a single family home, duplex, triplex, fourplex. The Garn-St. Germain Depository Institutions Act of 1982 says that the bank cannot call the loan due just because you change the title. As long as you're a beneficiary of this trust, move the property into it. They can't just say, okay, pay off your mortgage because you changed the title. This particular law protects you from the bank doing that. Now, on a separate piece of paper, what we do is we have an assignment of beneficial interest that assigns your beneficial interest in the property to an LLC. That way, you have asset protection when somebody sues you personally, and lawsuit protection if there's a slip and fall on the property where you're sued for more than your insurance coverage. So So this is how we protect domestic real estate. So initially, you're the beneficiary of the land trust. Then a separate piece of paper called an assignment of beneficial interest. We put the LLC as the beneficiary of the land trust on that separate piece of paper. We may have a living trust associated with the LLC. Typically what we'll do in the operating agreement, since the living trust doesn't provide asset protection, we'll say upon your passing, the LLC member becomes the living trust. That way you have your estate planning. We don't typically put LLCs into living trusts because what can happen is judge can say, okay, great, you're the beneficiary of this living trust, you're the trustee, change the beneficiary to this person who sued you. Now that person all of a sudden owns your LLC. So we don't immediately put LLCs into living trusts. We have it in the operating agreement that when you pass, the living trust becomes the member of the LLC at that time, so it can be handled through your estate plan. Next, we take a limited liability company, and this is another LLC we set up in Wyoming, and this has the office program and the nominee privacy service, so your name doesn't show up in the public record and your address doesn't show up in the public records. And then we take an equity stripping mortgage against the property that we record against your property to pull out the equity. This is an equity stripping line of credit mortgage. Again, no money changing hands. And if needed down the road for more robust protection, we can get a third-party lender that can automatically purchase this mortgage and put it into a you can't touch it account. We have to involve an offshore structure here because it gives stronger asset protection, and that's what we do down the road. But initially, just recording the mortgage, somebody looks in the public records and they're not going on a huge fishing expedition, this property will look mortgaged to the hilt. So we put a separate mortgage on each of your rental properties that make it look mortgaged to the hilt. So how does this look with 4 properties? We've gone over this in some other videos. So if you only want to use U.S. structures and/or you don't want to spend that much money to have an asset protection plan, each of your rental properties will go into separate land trusts. We make LLCs the beneficiaries of those land trusts, and over here is your personal residence, and your personal residence goes into a land trust only. The reason why we don't involve the LLC with the land trust that owns your personal residence is we don't want to affect your home ownership tax benefits, which is in a separate tax bucket than rental property. Things like being able to sell your personal residence as long as you've lived in it for the last 2 out of the last 5 years, and you can sell it without paying capital gains on a substantial portion of the proceeds. As we speak, it's $250,000 for a single person and $500,000 for a married couple. You don't have to pay capital gains tax on your personal residence. And the amount may change in future years, but it just gives you an idea why we don't make the LLC the beneficiary of the land trust that owns your home. And again, we take this LLC, and this could be, again, a Wyoming LLC or an offshore LLC if you do want to go offshore, but we're talking about U.S. strategies, and this records an equity stripping line of credit mortgage, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this case, a 1 against each property. So they look online, they don't see your name. They scratch past the surface and they see all your properties are mortgaged to the hilt. They say, gosh, I don't think I want to take this case because Sam, Sally, they're mortgaged to the hilt. It's not worth it. So to recap, liquid asset protection, we can go with a South Dakota trust with a Wyoming LLC inside of it that holds your bank account. Next step down from that is simply just using a Wyoming LLC with a nominee manager and virtual office that holds your bank account. And if you want to make that a multi-member LLC, we set up a second LLC that owns 2% of this. You own 98%. Now that becomes a multi-member LLC, and vice versa. This LLC can own 2% of that, and you can be the other 98% member of the second LLC. And then real estate land trust LLCs and land trust for your house with an equity stripping mortgage against all the property. So I hope you enjoyed this video on domestic asset protection. And for more free information, visit assetprotectionplanners.com. Reach out to us if you want to set up some of these structures. Please give me a thumbs up if you appreciate this video, and subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next video.